Hi guys, welcome back. I'm Craig and I'm a software developer in the UK, and in this video we're going to finish off the burger-based projects that we started in part 1 and close out this HTML section of videos. Then we can finally move on to CSS. We're building this static landing page for a burger restaurant, and if you haven't seen part 1 yet, you can either click on the card that's appearing on screen now to head back to it, or you can jump straight in from here and start from where we left off last time. And you can grab the code from where we're about to start from below in the description. There's links to a pen in CodePen if you want to work in that, or you can download the project repo from GitHub if you prefer. Before we start, don't forget to smash the like button and sub to the channel if you like the content. It really helps with YouTube's algorithm. The more engagement the channel gets, then the more YouTube will put the content in front of people that can genuinely benefit from it. We're on all of the main social media platforms, so keep up with us there, and the links to those are below in the description as well. So we're building this project, which is the landing page for a burger restaurant called BurgerBase, using all of the knowledge that we have acquired in the HTML videos up until now. In the previous video, we added the outer page wrapper, the nav bar complete with the logo and nav links. We also added this call to action header section, and we put in the footer at the bottom. So this is the point that we are going to start off from in this video. And as I said, if you haven't seen part 1 and want to work through it, then please head back now and do go through it. Otherwise, you can start from the point that we're going to start from now. So in this video, we'll add the remainder of the finished page, including these quote sections, the about section, the image grid, and the contact form. We'll also get all of the internal links in place, navigating to the right places on the page. Okay, so we're going to be moving from top to bottom, and we'll put in these quote sections that help break up the page and add a splash of color. The styles are coming from the pre-written CSS that I've included, and in the first video I explained why I'm including the CSS, so I will refrain from repeating myself here. I found these quotes by googling burger quotes, and this took me to this page here at Brainy Quotes, and I just picked a couple of quotes out. I picked one by Gigi Hadid and another by Scarlett Johansson, but of course feel free to pick out any quotes that you do prefer yourself. This section appears twice on the page, just with the text switched out. We can build this just once, then duplicate it and replace the text. The structure is incredibly simple, and if we inspect the finished project, we see that it's a semantic HTML5 section element that has the class of quote applied. Inside the section element is simply a paragraph element that contains the text of the quote. So it's pretty straightforward in terms of the HTML, and let's build that out now. So I'm in VS Code, and my file is in exactly the same state as we left it at the conclusion of the last video. If you want to work without the styles, you can simply by going to the head section of the HTML file and commenting out the linked style sheet. Then we just have the HTML rendered in the browser. If you're in CodePen, then you can open the CSS panel and just delete the CSS. Okay, so we'll start by adding a comment of quote section, and then we can add the structure for the quote itself. Again, Emmet is our friend here, and we just add section dot quote angled bracket p. So this is a section element with the class of quote applied, and this has a nested paragraph element. We'll hit tab, and Emmet generates this structure for us that was in the preview window. In among the files, I have a .txt file that contains all of the text we need. The first passage of text is what we need for this quote, so I will copy and paste that into the paragraph element. If you didn't download the repo, which contains this txt file, then I have a link here to a GitHub gist where you can copy this text from, and the link to that is down below in the description. Alternatively, you can go to the page that I showed you at Brainy Quotes, for which the link is also provided below, and you can get the quotes directly from there. And of course, if you prefer, you can enter any text of your choosing. So I'll save, and here we go. We have our section that's displaying the quote, as simple as that. We do need a second one of these, as I said, so we'll copy the whole lot and paste it again, and I'll just retrieve the second quote from the txt file, or from whichever means you're using, and then paste that into the paragraph element in the second quote section. These aren't stacked atop one another like this on the finished page. We have content between them, namely a section of descriptive text that is acting as an overview of what the company is about. Currently, this is just some lorem ipsum placeholder text then we have a grid of images. For me, this will comprise the main section of the page as it represents the dominant content of the document. If we head over to MDN's entry for the main elements, it says the HTML main element represents the dominant content of the body of a document. The main content area consists of content that is directly related to or expands upon the central topic of a document. So I think this is ideal for what we're trying to achieve with this section. Within the main section, we will have two nested sections, and the first is the text, which would make good use of the semantic article element. This element is used to represent a self-contained text composition. Then we have the image gallery, which will be another distinct section within the main section. So in between our two quotes, I'll use Emmet to build out the main element with a nested article for our text and a section element to hold our grid. So this will be main, angled bracket article plus section. The article element has an ID of about. This ID is useful as first it identifies the section, and secondly it's going to help us with our internal linking. We'll have a look at this in just a second after we add an H2 with the text of our story and a paragraph element which has some placeholder text for now. So this is going to be 65 words of lorem ipsum, and we can use the shortcut of lorem 65 inside the P element, hit tab, and Emmet is going to generate that text for us. I'll just remember to add the comments of main, about, and images. Okay, so before we get onto the image grid, we can get started with some of the internal linking here. The internal linking is when we link to sections within the same page. Earlier in this HTML series, we covered this topic in some depth. If you want to watch that again, the link is popping up on screen right now. But essentially, when we talk about internal links, then you might have, say, a really long single page application where you scroll down to content rather than clicking through a series of pages. At the bottom of such a page, you might have a clickable element or link which takes you back to the top of the page. A link that will take you back to the top of the page is simply what is known as an internal link or an anchor link. And these are really simple to create with HTML, and we do this using IDs. This explains why we've been giving certain sections of the page IDs like title or about. These are sections that we can navigate to from the links within the navbar. The ID attribute is used to specify a unique identifier for an HTML element. IDs can be used on any type of HTML element, but just to hammer it home, each ID is unique and can only be used once per page. So these IDs of title and about cannot be used again in this HTML document. For internal links, we use a hash or octothorpe followed by the name of the ID that is applied to the element that we want to return to. We've added a navbar already, in which we have added some navigation links for home, about, and contact. Presently, these are dead links, but if we add hash title to the href of the home link, this will have the effect of returning us to the top of the page, as the title of ID is applied here to the header element. Then, in the about links href, we'll add hash or octothorpe and about, and this will link us to the text in the main section as this has that matching ID. We'll also add this to the button in our header which says find out more. So let's save that and give all of that a go. So we can now click the first two nav links as well as the button in the header to scroll to different sections of the page. The third nav link is still a dead link as we've yet to build the contact section and form. Once we do that, we'll link to that in exactly the same way. This scrolling effect that you're seeing when we're navigating is not the default behavior, and it is actually coming from this JavaScript that I've included for you in the app.js file. We linked this file in the first video, and if you're working in CodePen, you didn't need to do that. The JavaScript is in the JavaScript pane here at the bottom. If we comment that out in the HTML file, we see that it just jumps rather than scrolls. The JavaScript smooth scrolling adds a nice touch, but I'm not going to explain it in great detail in this video, as it is beyond the scope of this video, which is on building out an HTML structure. But I'll give you an overview. Essentially, we're selecting all links that have an href that starts with a hash or octothorpe. Anything that does start with a hash will be an internal link. Anything that starts with an HTTP protocol will be an external link, and anything that starts with a document name, say something like contact.html, will be a relative link. Relative links point to locations that are relative to the current page. So we're selecting hrefs that start with a hash, then we're listening for a click on one of those links, and when there is a click, we're scrolling into view what is in the href. So what's in the href is of course an element with the matching ID. So in short, when we click a link, we're scrolling to the element with the ID that matches the link's href value. This JavaScript will work in any project that you have going forward, so do make use of it when you're creating your nav links. There's a snippet of this in a GitHub gist here, and I've added the link in the description below. Okay, so we're making good progress. All that we have left is the image grid and the contact form, and we'll start with the grid. If you're in CodePen, you cannot include the photos locally within your project, so I've got a GitHub gist here. So go to this and you can either take the code for the whole section, or you can just take the URLs of the images and paste them into the code that you write if you're following along. The image grid is actually fairly simple. Again, we'll use a semantic section element with the class of photos. This class pulls in some CSS, and with this grid we're making use of Flexbox, or the flexible box model. I'll cover Flexbox in the CSS section that is coming up following this video. Nested inside the semantic section element are 4 image elements. So we'll have section dot photos angled bracket img times 4. The alt text for each image is just going to be a burger. As for the src, well, we need to provide a path to the image files. In our project files, there is a folder called img, and this contains all of the images for the project. So we're interested in images 2, 3, 4, and 5. Image 1 was used as the background for the main header element. So the file names for these is what will go into the image elements src. We of course need to provide the full name, and that includes the .png extension as well as the path to the image from inside the image folder. So we'll add multiple cursors and change the image number. That's really the only difference between them. So the full path is the image folder, then a / followed by the file name. So in this case, we'll put img-2.png. To make sure that's the right path before we save, in VS Code we see that the path is underlined, and this means that we can hover it. On Mac it says I can hold Option plus click to check that the image is the correct one. If you're on Windows, you will have a slightly different command, but it will do exactly the same thing. Perhaps hover over the path, then hold Alt and click, but you'll have to try it out, as I'm not sure off of the top of my head. So this appears to be the right image, and it also shows us the location within the file structure as well. So I'll now go to the src of the other images, and these are going to be 3, 4, and 5. And again, I'll just hover over one of them at random, hold Option and click, and I'm fairly confident that I've sourced the correct images. If we wanted to use an image that we don't have stored locally, then we can source images from sites like unsplash.com, which is where these images that we are using are sourced from, or we can also use sites like pexels.com. We'll search for burger, and from the options we'll find an image we like, we'll right click and copy image address. Then we'll head back to the text editor and paste this address into the src. So I'll do this for the second image, and you see this time the src is just a URL, and this one is going to an external location, and all of the others are going to local locations. Where possible, you want your images to be within your control and sourced from a location that is controlled totally by you. External images from other sites could have their URL location changed, or they could be deleted altogether from the location that you're sourcing them from. When that happens, the image is going to disappear from your site. So if you have them within your control, this just won't happen. So I will change this back to what we had before, and then we'll move on to the contacts form now our image grid is complete. So we're pretty much at the final step of this project and the final step of the HTML section of video. So well done for getting here. To finish up, we're going to be building the front end of a contacts form and adding the internal link to the section in the navbar. Now, looking at the finished form, this is going to be a fairly simple form. Previously, we had a series of videos that covered forms, and in the final video, we built out a much more complex form than this. Here we just have a text and an email type of input element, a text area, and an input type submit. I will clarify that we are only building the front end of the form, meaning the presentational part that the user would interact with. The form will be functional on the user side, but the data that is entered into the form will not go anywhere. Pressing submit will simply have the effect of clearing the data from the front end and returning the form to its blank state. To send that data to the back end, we would need to use a programming language like PHP, JavaScript, Python, or Ruby to handle that, and that is beyond the scope of this video on HTML. We will of course cover all of this later on down the road when the time is right. We still have some leveling up to do before we hit that point though, so for now we're just building out the front end, the presentational side of this form, and anything programmatic we will cover later on in another video when our skills are developed a little bit more. So let's build this out. We need a form element with inputs and labels, and we'll need an H2 which says contact us. We'll wrap these together inside a section element that will define all of this as a distinct section of our page. So I'll start by going above the footer and under our second quote, and I'll make some space. Now using Emmet to create a section with the ID of section #contact, and I'll create some space inside. And let's not forget that this ID enables us to internally link to this section of the page from the navbar. So before we do anything more to the form, I'll pop up to the navbar and I will add hash or octothorpe and contact to the href of the link for the contact section. Though we don't have the form on the page at the moment, we have created the element that will house it, and the ID is in place that this nav link navigates to. So let's click it and we see that it is now navigating to the location where the form will be. So let's go back and we'll start with an H2 with the text of contact us, and of course we're going to need a form element. So this is H2, then some curly braces in which we'll put the text of contact us plus form. As we're working just with the front end and just with HTML, we don't need the action attribute for now. And we saw that our form has text and email inputs plus associated labels, a text area element and its label, and an input type of submit. So again, Emmet is our friend here, and we can build all of this out in one go using an Emmet shortcut. So follow me here, as this is going to be quite long. So we will have some parentheses, and inside these will be label plus input, and we will multiply all of that by 2. Then we will add another set of parentheses with label plus text area. And outside of that, we will add input : submit. Now if we hit tab and save, we are a decent amount of the way there already. There's just some small amendments and additions to what we've already got, but the main structure is there and most of the hard work is done already thanks to Emmet. We'll start with getting the submit button looking right. The value attribute controls the text that will go on the front of the button, and we want this to say submit. Submit is actually the default value, even if we don't add any text ourselves. So we actually don't need to add this attribute, and the result would be the same without it. Personally, I do like to add the value attribute on my input submit buttons for clarity, but if you want to omit it in this case, then that would be totally fine, as the text that we're adding to the button is the default value anyway. We also want our button to look and behave like the button that is in the header. So the same color scheme and properties and the same change when it is hovered. For this, we just give it the class that all of the CSS is coming from. And scrolling up to where the code is for the header element, we see that this is the class of button. So we will copy that, then head back to the input submit and just give it that class. Now we'll save and the changes are in place. Next, we need to go through each of these elements, link the inputs and labels, add label text and make any other adjustments that are necessary. So first, each of the inputs needs an ID that we can use to link the label to the input. We create this association by giving the input elements an ID and then saying that the label is for the identified input. So for the first input, we will create multiple cursors by clicking in the value of the for attribute, then holding Command or Control and clicking in the ID, and this will be name. We'll also give it some label text of name, and now if we save, we can check if the label and input are associated with one another. We do this by clicking on the label text, and if these are linked together, then clicking the label text will focus the inputs field, and that's working perfectly. For the second input, this is of course going to be a type of email, and we'll also have the for and ID as email as well. So this time I'll need 3 cursors. I'll double click where it says text, and in the for and ID I'll once again hold Command or Control on Windows and click the values of those attributes. Now I'll type email and those 3 are sorted out. Like last time, we'll need some label text. I'll also have this as email, and again I'll check the label and input are associated with one another by clicking the label text, and the input field is focused. Next, the text area, and the labels for attribute and the text area's ID will be comments. I'll also add the label text of comments. We don't need the columns or rows attributes, as the size of the text area box is being determined by CSS. We also do not need this name attribute, so we can delete that. The name attribute allows us to reference form data after a form is submitted to the backend. We haven't got any backend as we're working just in HTML at the moment, and we're not storing any data. If we were, we can easily bring the name attribute back in, and we would also call this comments. So there it is. We've built out the entire HTML structure for our first static web page. I will comment out the style sheet to remove the CSS. And now you see what this page looks like with just HTML. It's drastically different, but everything is still there as we wrote it. We have our nav with the logo and the UL, which contains links to the sections of our pages. We've linked internally by giving these distinct sections IDs, which we can give to the href or navigation. We have a semantic header section, which contains the page's h1, and the link, which was actually styled as a button. Let's bring the CSS back in, and we can see this. And we also see this section is basically a big call to action, in that we're asking the user to do something here. We're asking them to find out more, and this links to the about section, which at the moment just contains some placeholder text. This could quite easily be something like a link to an online store, and the background image could be your latest product, or it could be a link to subscribe to a newsletter, or it could be a link to an external location like a YouTube channel, for example. The header's image is nowhere to be seen in the HTML, and that is because we have set it as the background cover for the entire div. We'll look at exactly how to do that early on in the CSS videos that are coming next. Then we have these simple quote sections, a main section that contains some text, and a grid of images which were sourced from unsplash.com. We have a footer at the bottom which contains an HTML entity, and finally we have a contact form with some input elements, labels, and a text area. Okay, so this is as far as we're going to go. You can of course augment and add to this as much as you'd like, and I'd actually encourage you to do so to really make this project your own. You could add a table that displays a menu and some prices. Maybe you could add a video or even some additional pages to make this a multi-page site. You could remove the contacts form from the bottom of the page and create a contact.html file, for example. You would then have the nav link in the form link to that separate contact page. The possibilities really are endless, and I'd love to see you push your HTML skills to the limit. Reach out on social media and I'd be delighted to have a look at what you come up with. So this video closes the 20 video section that exclusively covers the HTML markup language. We'll continue using HTML all the time, even picking up new tricks along the way here and there, though HTML is not going to be the sole focus of our learning from here on out. The very next video will kick off the section of videos on CSS. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you below in the comment section and at the social media links that we've included below as well. Don't forget to smash the like button and sub to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for the first video on CSS.